You guys, I feel like you're teasing me right now. You're teasing me.
Did you smell that, Brandon? We call
Yes.
that sarcasm.
Sarcasm.
My name is Jeff Irving, and this is the Vrhode Tavern Podcast. I am the creator of the Vrhode game system, and in this podcast, we're going to do a deep dive into the lore and gameplay of Vrhode. I'm joined by Brandon Rollins, who will be acting as a stand-in for you, asking many of the questions you might be curious about yourself. We're also joined today by campaign book writer Shawn Allen Dressler. Brandon, what is our topic for today?
All right. So, on the last couple of episodes, we've had Shawn on to talk about all things that go into writing campaign books. And there's a lot that goes into that. But there is one question that I've been wondering about, honestly, for the last several episodes. And that is, what exactly is the Calteeryn? And I know that's kind of a loaded question for this podcast. So, I'm just going to pose that to both of you guys and see what happens.
What do you think, Shawn? You want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. So the Calteeryn is really unlike, both from a story and a game mechanic standpoint, unlike anything I've seen in a tabletop game. It is, from a story standpoint, the central character. The Calteeryn is this prophecy of a character to come to Vrhode to step in as its hero and save the world from ultimately being subjected to the ultimate evil of the world. And I don't want to go any farther into that aspect than that because spoilers would ensue. But so from a story element, it is the central character as this prophesied one. From a game mechanic standpoint, it gets really, really interesting because, as you know, the game can be played from 1 to 6 players, but only one of those players can be the Calteeryn. And the Calteeryn mechanically is significantly different than the other players in one big aspect. That is that the Calteeryn, over the course of the game, gains powers that are held by the other races in Vrhode. And so right off the bat, you're introduced to this character, and you might have a little bit of a shocked reaction when you learn that one of the players in my playing party is going to be playing something very different than the rest of us. And we're going to have to learn how to work as a group to complement each other's skills, not just in the normal asymmetric way that a lot of tabletop games do, but also in a very unique way in that we're all, in a certain way, supportive of the Calteeryn character.
So this asymmetry is built right into the story, is that right?
It absolutely is. It's built into the story as much as it's built into the mechanics of the game.
So as far as I understand it, anybody theoretically can be the Calteeryn. So is it chosen at random? Is there some other kind of mechanism that is used to decide who in the party is the chosen one?
Yeah, so there's a certain amount of suspension of disbelief that we have to beg from our players at that moment when they choose who among the party is the actual Calteeryn. Now, the story begins and you become introduced to this Calteeryn character who does have a bit of a backstory. And so whoever is chosen to function, to serve as the Calteeryn, this prophesied one within the party, essentially is adopting that backstory. Because we need a central character, of course. And so the Calteeryn is that central character. And so in that moment, the players get to choose however they want. I think we give a few suggestions about how they might. But if there's 6 people sitting around the table, they get to decide who's going to be the Calteeryn. It could be any one of them, any gender, any race.
Yeah, that's really interesting how that works. So, I mean, it's kind of like it really can be anyone. It can be an Atakul, it can be a Kaltuk, it can be anybody, even if you wouldn't think that they would be.
That's correct.
And so does that create kind of interesting tensions in the story as well?
It does. It does. And this is consistent in so many both tabletop and video game adventure role-playing games where, because the game developers don't know what you're going to choose as your name, your race, your gender. They have to write the story in such a way that there are aspects of it that are generic that would apply no matter what you fill into those blanks. And we're no different. We haven't found the magic pill to avoid that. And the only other real option is to curate everything and tell people what their name and race and gender are. And we just don't want to do that to the players. There's a reason it's role playing. We want them to choose that role.
What do you think about the Calteeryn mechanically, Shawn? Do you feel like, I mean, obviously we're adding powers. Win condition of the core box is to fulfill this prophecy, is to help Calteeryn fulfill the prophecy and actually become Calteeryn. So we've got that happening as a win condition, but the process under which we're taking this prophesied one, we're adding abilities, but we're also making this character the target of enemies. We're increasing the pressure on this. And so it almost makes the supporting cast even more important, because it's their job to try to help keep this prophesied one alive so that they can all enjoy the win condition.
Totally. There's so many elements of that I think are exciting.
So it's like a tower defense. You know what I mean? It's almost like it's like a tower defense game.
Yeah, it's almost like the Calteeryn is a moving tower in one aspect. In another aspect, it's almost like an escort game where you're escorting the Calteeryn through the game to fulfill the win condition. Yet at the same time, this is the most powerful escort you've ever been with, because he has powers that he or she has powers that you don't have. Not only that, but in a normal asymmetric game, or in a I'll call it a usual asymmetric game, all of the various abilities tend to complement each other in a way that you could make different choices and leave any one of them out and find a way to compensate for it. You can't leave the Calteeryn out. And so you have to build your party around this character. And so in a certain way, everybody in the party is a support character to the Calteeryn. Even the tank is a support character to the Calteeryn, which is, I think, really cool.
Calteeryn might even end up being the tank.
That's true.
So,
well, that's a point. It could be anything.
Yeah,
that's right. And so it just, to me, it adds a wrinkle that is going to send its waves through the whole game, and how you would think about assembling a party, how you would think about managing your progression throughout the game in a way that I've never seen a game do before.
Yeah, so I am curious, how does it work for the Calteeryn to have powers that are held by other characters in the game?
Yeah, and so without getting too bogged down into minutia of mechanics, essentially there are 10 created races in this world, and each of these races operates in part with a power system that is called rule, RUHL. And what this rule does within each of the races respectively is it essentially allows them to have unique abilities that other races don't have. And we call them mechanically racial abilities. So when the Calteeryn learns to master the rule of another particular race, what they gain is that race's racial abilities. So as you progress through the game, you're gaining all of these powers that are very specific to the various cultures of the world of Vrhode. So, for instance, if you are maybe a Kautuk player who has taken on the role of Calteeryn, well, you already have the Kautuk racial abilities, but you don't have the Athakul, the Minok, the Drellrune, the Sarun, the Chorn, etc. And so as you collect them, you essentially become this master of all cultures.
Really great job on the pronunciation too, by the way, Shawn. You just nailed those.
I think these words quite often.
I'm still working on my pronunciation. That's actually one of the subplots of this podcast, is me continuously pronouncing things less incorrectly as we go on. Yeah, so I mean, we're naturally talking about the Calteeryn kind of leads us into talking about gameplay. So one other thing I want to ask about is what specific gameplay mechanics that you can talk about are you excited to see people play on the table?
Yeah, man, there's a list of them. So one thing that is super exciting to me that I haven't seen, I don't think I've seen it in a tabletop game. If I have, it's been very, very simplistic, is our village function. So main villages in this game serve a lot of different purposes. Um, if you are a player who is coming from more of a video game RPG standpoint, oftentimes you might be a little disappointed with how little villages play a role in games as checkpoints, as places to get quests, as places to purchase and gather and regenerate yourself, as places to interact with NPCs. And in Vrhode, we've crafted a village function and structure that I think is going to be pretty exciting to a lot of people who maybe have been hoping that this would be done really well in a tabletop game. I know I'm really excited to play it,
Well,
and
this is
I'm writing it.
this is a late ad.
It is.
I
It
mean,
is.
this isn't something that we have so many modes of play in the series that, you try to think about keeping the game fairly streamlined and simple, because that's what we've kind of aired on every time we've had a choice between realism and simplicity, is we've tried to keep things streamlined and simple. But this mode just kind of screamed at us and said, "Hey, you've got to do justice to this." And yeah, so it's going to be fun.
So
Yeah.
what made you make the decision to add that at the last minute? Was it not the last minute, but what made you decide to add it at this point? Did you just feel like it was a glaring omission in the story, or did you feel like it was just a missed opportunity to add some strategic play in there?
For me, it didn't really have anything about story as much as when I mentioned this concept of adding this kind of viability to the villages. Shawn really liked the idea and he kind of took it and ran with it. And so we ended up with, multiple functions and what else, Shawn? We got, I mean, they're basically like a hub of activity now.
Absolutely. They function like a real village. There's your local tavern and inn. There's your commission board to get quests.
Merchants.
There's merchants where you can go and trade. It creates this place in the world where you feel like you are actually in the world. And to me, it's the kind of thing that roots me in a game. It makes me feel present in the game. And because I can imagine myself just sitting there in the tavern when I read the story intro to the innkeeper, and I feel like I'm right there with them. And I want to speak to that decision too a little bit more from a general sense and how we've approached building the game from the beginning. And this is really just one example of what has happened several times, where anytime there's an aspect of the game that we feel like either isn't fully developed or just isn't carrying its weight, a central question that we keep asking ourselves is, how can we make this function more fun? How can we make it add more game value? And the village function was really, for a while, it was just dots and labels on a map. And now it's grown to so much more. It's a place that you can return to. It's a place that um, takes on a real sense of being a place in the world. And yeah, I just think it's going to be super exciting for
Yeah.
people to dig in.
Yeah, it makes the whole place feel more lived in.
Totally.
I think we've kind of had this kind of iterative process with each gameplay mode. And to me, you asked Shawn, or you asked us both, but Shawn answered earlier about what he was excited about, in seeing people play, which part of the game. And, to me, it's the fact that we have these unique play modes and that the game isn't just one way to play. It's we've broken this big epic game into simple bite-sized chunks by having different modes. And traveling through the overlands has a rhythm. It's its own mode. And when you get tired in the overlands, the time you have to take to rest and recharge your batteries, if you're not in one of these wonderful villages we just talked about, well, rest out on the road is its own mode. It has a different rhythm to it. As you try to heal everyone up to full, well, you have different perils that can happen while you're resting. You can try to set a watch to prevent ambush, and you can try to do these things, but you're all a bunch of weary travelers. And so trying to keep the person on watch awake is a challenge. But that's just a couple examples of how these modes take what might otherwise be this big kind of overwhelming glob of rules, and it bakes the world down into these manageable bite-sized cookies that are each one, they taste different, and they're I think they're really, I mean, of course, playtesting is going to help us adjust and get the nuances right, but I really think it's going to make the game really, really fun.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that it's also going to be a game where people who have very different style of tabletop gaming that they enjoy are all going to be able to find that aspect of Vrhode or aspects of Vrhode, modes of play within Vrhode that they really enjoy. And we've tried to make it in such a way that if you are a more story-focused player, we have a mode for that. If you are a more procedural, you just want to play by yourself and solo some quests, we have a mode for that. If you really love challenging asymmetric play and you play with a party all the time, we have a mode for that. And I think that Jeff's point is a good one, that it's broken into these pieces and that are really easy to wrap your mind around, take a long time to master, but are rewarding from beginning to end. I also want to say that I'm super excited about how we're going to introduce those modes. And Jeff spoiled this a little bit earlier, but that's okay. We're not going to get into it. But
no, I think I pulled up short on spoiling it. But you go ahead. You go ahead, Shawn. Spoil away.
He did, but I'm going to also pull up short. I'm only going to say, because it's already been mentioned a little bit, that I'm really excited for the players to meet Corbwalder and all that he is to this world. And I'm going to stop right there.
I had to run to the trash can. Did you say Corbwalder?
I did.
No, I think we can. I honestly think it's okay to talk in a general sense about how we're trying to welcome players into this game system. And I don't think there's anything wrong with kind of keeping it at that kind of conversation, that kind of level.
Yeah. Well,
I think we
can
comfortably talk about the first hour of the game and not feel like that's too spoilery.
Yeah. So go ahead, Shawn. I mean, kind of just address it in a general sense about how, because we both felt pretty satisfied about this idea, this concept.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of games do some version of this. What I think we've tried to do is make the game such that the moment you open the book, you are in the game. And so even the process of selecting what type of game mode you want to start with is part of the game. It's part of the immersion into the game. And Corbwalder, among other roles, plays a part in helping you to choose what game mode you're going to play. Corbwalder is actually the proprietor of a very famous inn and tavern in central Rendur in Vrhode. And what I'll say about him is that he is much more than he seems.
That's not too spoilery.
No, I don't think so.
No, that's acceptable spoilerage.
Yeah, and I have a feeling that just by the merit of being the bartender, one of the central bars in the whole world of Vrhode, like, he's got to be privy to a lot of information, so he's going to be a good kind of guide when you're getting into the game.
Yeah. He is very knowledgeable.
You guys, I feel like you're teasing me right now. You're teasing me.
Did you smell that, Brandon? We call that sarcasm.
Yeah. And another thing that I'm excited about, Jeff mentioned the rest mechanic. I want to take that a little bit further, because the rest mechanic, we've tried, and Brandon, you alluded to this, we've tried to make all of the mechanics in the game relate back to both story and some form of realism. Now, we've always erred on the side of gameplay value rather than fidgetiness. And so anytime an element of realism threatened to kind of cross that line to just being burdensome, we excised it from the game. But everything still is tied back to some element of realism. And so, for instance, what Jeff was talking about earlier is this rest mechanic where you remove tiredness in the form of what we call fatigue from your character. And the rest mechanic is essentially our campfire. And so we've tied it directly not only to just a system where you maybe roll a dice or flip a card and rest, but it's physical. This game actually has a campfire miniature. This game actually has a way for you to be resting as a part of the gameplay of rest. And that attention to detail, I think, is going to be really immersive and just be another way that the game really draws you in while you're playing.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Shawn. I think if there's a way to describe our game that sets it apart, our game series, I should say, is it's almost like 5 or 6 really fun and different mini games.
Yeah, that all work really well together and contribute and support each other.
Yeah.
Which gives a game kind of a lasting sense of variety and replayability over time.
Yeah,
exactly.
And hopefully it keeps it fresh as you play. I mean, I was going to ask, Shawn was kind of clicking through the different types of game players and the modes that they would be able to choose and how they would go about choosing those. I think you also have a fair amount of people that just want to hack and slash. They just want to kill things, and you also have people that care a lot about gear. They want to kind of gear grind or farm for things. Where do you find those type of players would be happiest within our game system, Shawn? Where's the hack and slash are going to go?
Yeah, so I think that those players are first of all, I think they're going to be happy pretty much anywhere in the game system because we've crafted the story in such a way that it's going to be from a design standpoint very visible. So if you want to just move from quest to quest to quest, skip the story and just do the encounters, there's nothing stopping you from do that. Now, as the writer, I'm going to be deeply offended and I'm probably going to be upset with you, but you can do that. But that being said, we've also created game modes that are more hack and slash, dungeon crawl, stay in the action friendly. And so really, there's a variety of, there's sort of a spectrum there. We've got what we call expeditions. Expeditions are series of quests that are much smaller, of course, than the campaign, but they give you a sense of completing a journey without having to take on the mammoth length and duration of the campaign. Right below that, we have what we call missions. Missions are really just one quest, but they have several encounters and a little bit less story separating one encounter from the next, so that you can maybe you can play an entire mission in a day or an afternoon if you're really motivated. We also have a game mode that we call skirmishes. So skirmishes are they're a little bit like mini missions where you're really not moving around the map so much at all as you are moving through one particular map region. And within skirmishes, it's a little bit more rapid fire. It's a little bit more, set you up and go. And so you can pull out the box, set up a skirmish, play, and be done in maybe an hour.
So that's like a nice little hack and slash session, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, I'm definitely more story forward. I'm going to gravitate to the expeditions and the missions and the campaign. But we also have a short form game mode called Ancient Errands. And Ancient Errands have a bit more of a story thread that runs through them without it being the focus. It's more like a web that the quests are built from, and they're the shortest form of quests that we actually have. Actually, that's not true. We just added one, and it's probably going to be even shorter.
Well,
But
you think the ones in the village are going to be shorter?
I think they might. I think some of them might be from the commission boards.
Yeah.
But anyway, all that to say that there's a huge range of length and sort of in-depthness to story within and amongst all the different quest types.
Yeah. And then what about gear? Where am I going to
satisfy?
I'm a guy that likes to have the good stuff. Where am I going to go? I think where would you send them for that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I would speak a little bit generally about gear to start with, because a lot of games are really focused on grinding and looting, right? And so you'll spend a ton of time retreading ground, playing the same encounter over and over, or wandering around over and over in the same region. And you can certainly do that in Vrhode. But we haven't crafted the game in such a way that you're going to fill up a 1,000 item inventory with lots of minutia that the only value it has is some monetary value in the game. We've tried to strip those kinds of very fidgety, low game value add aspects out of the game. And so we focus a lot more on every item has a specific function, and every item is unique. And so, for instance, we don't really have items that are just for the purpose of selling. That doesn't exist in the game. Every item is an item that you might want to keep based on what your play style is, what your role in your party is. And so, from a gear standpoint, whether you're playing the campaign or whether you're playing one of the many non-campaign modes, you're going to have access to rewards both from defeating enemies, from completing quests, from completing portions of the game that give you access, and just from being in the world and drawing what we call exploration cards that give you access ultimately to most of what is available from a gear standpoint, both basic, medium, and high level. That being said, we also have paid really close attention to making sure that the highest value rewards are the ones that have the highest bar to entry. And so we do have a completely separate deck. There are two item decks, one that we call just the items deck, and the other that we call the special items deck. And as you might guess, the special items deck is going to be generally more valuable items that are harder to get.
Yeah, so if somebody is seeking to just get a whole bunch of loot, they'll actually have to, it sounds like they'll have to go to a bunch of different places to kind of pick that up from different kinds of missions and that sort of thing. Just because you can find things all over the game.
You can. But I would say that if there's one player style that might be disappointed playing this game, it's the one that wants the Santa Claus bag to fill up with loot. Because we just don't, it takes away from one of the core principles of how we've built this game, and that is that everything has specific value and is essentially a curated item. And so that's the main premise behind how we've structured the inventory mechanic in the game. In this game, we have a finite and quite small inventory. And so part of the challenge of the game, as Jeff pointed out to me in a previous call, is it's you versus your inventory. And what he meant by that, and he can correct me if I if I paraphrase him not very well, is because you have a limited number of slots in your inventory, we are always going to be making decisions as we encounter a new item about whether it is more or less valuable than everything else in our inventory. And oftentimes you're going to be disappointed because you're going to have to drop an item that you love to keep an item that you love more.
Yeah, and I mean, by causing people to do that, it's like, yeah, you might turn away a few people who are looking for a whole lot of loot, just sheer quantity. But I don't know. There's a huge benefit to keeping it simple. I mean, there's the kind of the cynical stuff, which is like, oh, keep the cost of printing down and that kind of thing. But it's like, honestly, having way too much loot and way too many cards to hold and way too much stuff to look at can actually become quite distracting after a while. So forcing people to make these decisions makes them kind of appreciate the loot that they do have and know that nothing in those decks, any of those decks, is garbage.
Yeah, exactly. And Jeff could probably give you an exact number. I won't put him on the spot too, but where this game restricts you in the amount of items you can hold at one time, it graciously rewards you in the amount of items that are actually in the game to discover. And something that's really exciting to me is when I finally get to play this complete product, is the progression system from basic to more advanced items in each category.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, part of our challenge in the game to me is that we kind of have a three-pronged approach, and like Shawn mentioned, it's almost like you against your inventory, because your inventory really doesn't have monetary value. We have, the things that you aren't equipping that sit in your inventory have a function, and they have a value, which is a barter value, because we have a barter system since we don't have minted coinage. And so is the value in a barter situation higher or lower than the functional value of that, of having that? And the wonderful thing we do to try to streamline play is we assume an awful lot. In other words, if you have a torch in your inventory, we assume when it's dark, you're going to light the darn thing. We're not going to make you say, "Oh, and I light my torch." It plays into the math. Some people are going to care about that particular battle, the math that occurs within your inventory. Some people are going to be more focused on the way the world challenges you, because that's another prong of the challenge in our world, is you against the environment. It's a harsh world. And then, of course, the primary challenge is always going to be you versus the physical enemies that you face. But in our world, we've downplayed money. We've downplayed having, thousands and thousands of pieces of coinage in your pocket. We've downplayed having, dozens and dozens and pieces of thing in your inventory. And we've tried to make it more about the functional kind of three-pronged challenges that an adventurer would face in a primitive world. And that's it. We have this kind of primitive world that you're in. It's wild, it's untamed. And we throw in a dash of kind of like Darkest Dungeon challenge level, with making it three-pronged. So you may be handling one of the three challenges extremely well, but if you let one of the other two suffer, you're ultimately going to be dead pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. Streamlining a lot of those rules and having those assumptions, it makes the game, in my opinion, or it sounds like it's going to make the game quite a bit more accessible, which is going to mean that it's actually going to get tabled quite a bit more too.
That's the goal.
Yeah, exactly. There's a low bar to entry for setup, and that, to me, as a person who probably plays twice as much video game RPG than I do tabletop, that's one of the biggest things that pushes me away from a lot of games, is I just don't have the time to spend an hour setting up a game just to get going, or a half a day learning how to play it. And so we've really tried to strip out all of the non-value add elements of the game.
Yeah. I think you're right too, especially on setup. I feel like, this, you're going to get to the table. I mean, we could probably sit down with 2 or 3 players, open the box, and be in a quest within 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, and this is not unique. I don't want to claim that we've invented this, but we've also designed the tutorial section of the campaign mode to be interactive. It's not we're going to provide both a way to learn the rules by playing the game and a complete rule book for you to have at your side.
Yeah, I think, these are all good considerations. Just anything to make it easier to get people to start playing, because we're all busy. It's like any massive rule book is going to be automatically intimidating.
Yeah, absolutely.
the way Shawn introduces the long form version of the rules within the campaign is brilliant, and it is great for introducing people to all the rules, but over time and buried in quests and in an interesting way. And then mine is just the completely, the opposite end of that. It's just give people the least amount of verbiage to describe each facet of gameplay, shake and bake, no nonsense, for those people that want to hit the ground running and just play. And I'm the kind of person that I would definitely start with a concise form of rules just to get in and try to start figuring out whether I like the game or not. And then I'm going to eventually wander in, and I'll probably reread that long form of rules in the campaign as I go through that as well. But I always like to get a game to the table pretty quick when I get a new game, just to see how intimidating the rules are. And I think that's where it's going to be wonderful, is that it's going to be this refreshing kind of like, whoa, this isn't so bad kind of thing. If people choose to go with the short form rules, but then for those people that go into the campaign and do it the way Shawn has written it, what I love about it is it's almost like it could be your very first kind of epic fantasy dungeon crawl adventure game that you're playing. But Shawn has explained it in such a way that it's simple. It's easy to understand, and it draws you right into the story. And so I think we're kind of smacking them from both sides, and I think it'll be well received, because it is a very different approach than I've seen.
Yeah, me too. I've seen some hybrid versions of this, but I've never really seen both in the same box. And I think that it really speaks to, again, the inclusiveness that we're trying to use in this game to let it be accessible to everyone. Another thing that I'm really excited about is how all the different game modes tie together, even though they are separate. Something we've tried really hard to do is to not have content that sits over here in a corner and doesn't relate to the rest of the content. And so whether you're playing an expedition, a mission, an ancient errand, a commission board quest, the full campaign mode, a skirmish, all those quests are not only existing within the world of Vrhode in a specific place, but they're also involving characters that you might have run into before in a different place, and involve elements of story that relate to and sometimes explain things that you might not have fully understood while playing a quest in a different mode of play. And so I think what we've tried to do is make the whole game supportive of itself, and in a way that if you are the kind of player who just really loves, like Jeff was mentioning earlier, more of a hack and slash style, and maybe you get through all of those types of quests and say, you know what, I just really enjoy this game. I'm going to go back and I'm going to play the campaign mode. Well, you're going to find yourself smiling because you're going to be running into familiar faces and familiar places and familiar stories, and maybe even understanding better the quests that you just completed.
Well, that's cool. That's going to make people want to come back again and again to make sure that they got all the details they didn't catch the first time around.
Mm-hmm.
I will definitely say this game is a completionist's treasure trove.
Oh yeah, definitely. And the other thing too, one of the last pieces of the puzzle we're working on presently, and this is even after adding the village mechanic to the game series, is this idea of giving people a simple way to choose their difficulty level. And some people want to play and be part of a story, and they don't mind combat, but they sure don't want combat getting in the way of the story. And we're lucky that we have Shawn to create a story that's rich enough that we're gonna have a fair chunk of people gravitating that way. They're gonna want to just go through this campaign and really be completionists in it and see what happens. What happens at the end when Calteeryn fulfills the prophecy. And so, but then for those hack and slashers, for those people that love Red Hook's Darkest Dungeon PC game, and loved basically just trying to keep a walking meat sack alive. We want to be able to scale the difficulty to satisfy those people. And so we're in kind of the early iterations of designing this difficulty chart and ways that you can add and take away some of the challenges that exist within combat, within adventure, whether that's the quantity of enemies, the frequency of enemies, the difficulty of enemies. And I think if we can find a way through enough iteration of this kind of table we have to make it really simple, I think it's going to add it's just going to show people in yet another way how much care we've tried to put into this thing to making it a very, very viable game system that deserves to have content creators create their own quests within it.
Absolutely.
So that's my hope.
I think that is a good note to end on because we are coming up on time. So honestly, there's a lot that we can cover in future episodes. So why don't you take us out on this one?
Thank you for listening to the Vrahode Tavern Podcast. If you enjoyed this show, take a moment to subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review. It helps more than you know. You can learn more about Vrahode on Vrhode.com. That's VRAHODE.com. Link in the show notes. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where we're at Vrahode. Thank you again for listening. We really appreciate it. Keep an eye out for our next episode in 2 weeks.